The GridView control is an extremely flexible control that allows you to retrieve and display data in an automatically generated table. In this lesson, you'll create a basic GridView control that displays invoices in order of date. To begin, open the Spark sample file from your Sample Files folder. And open the code behind file of reports.aspx. Now remove all existing code from the page load event handler. We are now going to add a link data source control to the page. Open reports.aspx in Design View. Now add a new link data source control just after the label report control. And set its ID property to link data source invoice. Now configure the data source to retrieve records from the invoice table and sort them by invoice date in ascending order. You learned how to do this in Lesson 11.1. We are now going to add a GridView control to the page. You'll find it in the Data category of the toolbox. Place it after the Link Data Source Invoice control. Now set the ID property of the new GridView to GridView Invoice. And set the Enable View State property to false. You should almost always disable View State on the GridView control by setting its Enable View State property to false. If you leave View State enabled, the user's browser will send back the entire contents of the GridView control every time they post back the page. The only time you might want to leave View State enabled is if you have a particularly slow query. In this case, it might be faster for the user to keep sending back the data than it would be to rerun the query. As a general rule, always disable View State on GridView controls, and only enable it again if it is absolutely necessary. Next, we're going to set the data source of the GridView control. Click Choose Data Source from the Quick Tasks menu of the GridView, and select Link Data Source Invoice. As you can see, the columns from the database table are automatically added to the GridView control. Now we'll edit the GridView's columns. Click Edit Columns from the Quick Tasks menu. The Fields dialog appears. Now click Invoice ID in the Selected Fields list, and remove it by clicking the Delete button. Now remove the Customer ID field in the same way. Next, click the Invoice Date field. All of the field's properties are displayed in the Bound Field Properties panel. Find the Data Format String property and set it to begin curly brackets 0 colon D end curly brackets. This is a data format string. Data format strings aren't the same as the format strings you learned about in Lesson 5.9, but they have a similar function. The most useful data format strings are D, which you've just used to format a short date, capital D, which is a long date, T, which is a short time, C, which is a currency value, N, which is a number, and any number of zeros and decimal places, which format a number using the indicated number of digits. For example, 000.00 would format 12.1 to 012.10. Next, set the data format string of the invoice amount field to begin curly brackets 0 colon C end curly brackets, and do exactly the same thing for the invoice tax amount field. Now click OK. As you can see, the date and value fields are now much easier to read. The grid view control looks nicer now, but it's not as attractive as it could be. You can use Auto Format to change that very easily. Click Auto Format from the Quick Tasks menu, choose the Classic format, and click OK. You've now completed Lesson 11.3. Use the Grid View control.